Good afternoon, I'm David Bay, I'm the chair for this afternoon. I'm the course leader of the MA Photographic Studies course that has the work up here. Welcome, very nice to see you all here. We've got a great afternoon lined up, I think, so I hope you can stay with us for a while. We have an auction after the discussion. We're serving drinks, so think of this as like a daytime cocktail bar with kind of photography theme as an event. What we've asked each of our speakers to do is to... Can I hear music? Maybe we should turn the other music down a bit. Cut the electricity and we won't have any art. Yeah. So I'll just wait till the chair's scraping stops, because the acoustics in here are pretty terrible, so we need a kind of church-like quiet to function. Okay, so what we have planned is... Is that okay? Good, thank you. We have 4 speakers. Gemma Padley, who's Deputy Editor. Senior reporter at the British Journal of Photography magazine, which is a great publication. At the other end, we have Lucy Suter, who is a senior tutor at the Royal College of Art and author of a lovely little book called Why Art Photography, which I like more and more as I read it. Next to him is Paul Hill, whose old but brilliant book called Approaching Photography is still one of my favourite books on kind of fundamentals around photography. And next to Paul is Brian Griffin, whose work you will know in many different capacities and contexts. And the students invited each of these speakers to respond to the title of the show, which is On Transience. And most titles of shows come about from a kind of complex negotiation. And On Transience seemed to be a theme that all the group felt that they could kind of live with, as an umbrella term around the work. And it's been interesting to look at the work and think about that theme, to think how the idea of transience, in any sense of that, resonates in different ways across the work. So we thought it'd be great to open that up as a discussion. So what we've asked to do is each of the speakers are going to make a 10-minute presentation of their own choosing, and that will take 40 minutes by logic, apart from 1 or 2 glitches with computer swap overs and so forth. So we'll have about 45 minutes of talk from here, and then we'll have a discussion, which I will try and lead. So without further ado, I will start with Gemma Padley, who's going to speak first. Okay. And I've got a clock, so if all of you would kindly keep to 10 minutes, that would be brilliant for everybody.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I did time mine just before I came out, and it came out at about 8 and a bit minutes, so hopefully if I slow down a little bit, then I can pad it out. So thank you for the introduction, and thank you all for coming this afternoon. It's lovely to be here. So a bit of background to me. So I'm senior reporter at BJP, which is, as you may know, the longest running photography magazine in the world. We're monthly, and as well as our print edition, we also publish a monthly app edition for the iPad. We also have a weekly bite-sized iPhone edition, and also our web presence at BJP Online. So I write for the print edition, but also produce quite a bit of online content as well, responding to news stories across the fields of photojournalism, art photography, commercial, and also working with emerging photographers, as well as some old hats, bad joke, book publishers, photography agents, festival directors, curators, and pitch editors, so on, so on. So why am I telling you all of this? It's not just a sales pitch, I promise. I mention these different platforms because for my 10 minutes, I'd really like to focus on one area of contemporary culture of which photography plays a really crucial part, and that's publishing. And by this I mean the way we share and experience images online, but also in a print magazine context, both with specialist sort of niche titles and more sort of mainstream titles. So for me, what I want to talk about, rather than focusing on how photography itself is changing, I'd like to talk a little bit about the ways in which we experience photography and what this might mean for photographers. So when I started to think about today's topic, photography and transience, I began to think about all the different ways we at BJP experience images, and we see an awful lot of images, both those that are sent to us and also that we source ourselves, scouring blogs, magazines, online magazines, other websites, agency websites, so on and so forth, the list goes on. It's a constant sort of battle to keep on top of everything that's going on in contemporary photography. So quite often I'll see something that catches my attention, and unless I make a note of it straight away, it's gone in an instant. And I haven't figured out a way of really keeping everything, all my research together yet, so I'm working on that all the time, because there's just so much out there. And you don't need me to tell you that there's a lot of content, and that's great online, gives you a lot of choice, but too much choice can be a bad thing as well. You can get a bit lost in it all. So the way we collectively are publishing images and the way we're using images, more importantly, is massively changing. And publishing is going through an intense and prolonged period of transition. I'm not telling you anything new there. And it has been for a while, and it's showing no sign of really slowing down or stopping. So this rapid development of digital communications, this distribution of images through online magazines, blogs, tablets, etc., has completely turned the publishing industry and photography as part of that on its head. The print magazine, as we found on BJP, perhaps, no longer holds sway in the same way it used to, although it still has its place, I believe. You may feel differently. People are increasingly looking to the web for their information, and as a result have become far more active in the way they consume, which is a horrible word, their media and images. And if you think about it, reading a magazine is quite a passive experience, since the editors decide what to present to you for you to read. While online, you can navigate your own path far more easily and quickly. There's more freedom to do this. But the downside, online, an image is gone in a second, and there are always more yapping at its heels. So whereas in print, you can take your time over what you're looking at and are less likely to be distracted by everything else on the web. So in this way, we found at least, the publisher no longer holds a monopoly. Anyone, of course, can share images however they choose. And these changes affect all photographers who are looking to make, or who are already making, their living from photography, not to mention the publishers who have been thrown into a spin trying to figure out how to create new revenue streams and publishing models from something that is constantly shifting, and quite frankly, no one really knows where it's going. So in this context, what role does the magazine, specifically a magazine about photography, play in contemporary culture? And where does this constantly evolving industry in publishing and photography as part of that leave photographers? Of course, this is a really huge topic and not one that can be properly discussed and debated in the 10 minutes I have here. But I want to pull out a few ideas that I hope might prove to be a little bit of food for thought. So firstly, let me put a very simple question to you. When you're taking a photograph or editing a series of images, how much thought do you give to where the images will end up? And by this I mean, do you think about how people might view and share your images online, or how your images might look and be received if reproduced in print? I'm not saying you should adapt the way you produce your images to suit one medium or the other, but it's worth thinking about the different ways we look at and experience images, because each environment, online and in print, has a unique character, and I feel an understanding of each is useful in thinking about how you show your work and get your work out there, which is ultimately what it's all about. So online versus print, if we can put it like that, what is the value of each? Is one better than the other? Should we even be asking that question? Does it matter? I'd like to share a little story, very briefly, that got me thinking about the value of both of these medias. A few months ago, a PR push for coverage in BJP, we hadn't discussed where the particular article about a new photo book by quite an established photographer would go, but I said, we could consider running a story in a print magazine, or perhaps on the BJP website. To which the PR's immediate reaction was, we'd only like to run the story if it goes in print. And I was a little taken aback by that, because I hadn't expected the PR to be so against running the story online. I thought that the chance of exposure to a huge audience via the web would have been a big draw, for while it's lovely to have something in print, no one's going to dispute that, for posterity, etc., and we have good print circulation and distribution at BJP, there are so many more people will see the work online. So I started wondering, is it better for work to be online, where lots of people are likely to see it, but where it's also likely to disappear into the ether and be in danger of being drowned out by everything else that's going on, or for the work to go in print and last potentially forever? In truth, I don't think it's possible to completely separate the two, and there's too much overlap for that, and nor should we think of these things as being separate. Perhaps a combination of both is the key to success and a better approach. So, running the risk of sounding like I'm sitting on the fence, I think both have their own merit and place. Print, or rather quality print publications, maybe there's a distinction there to be made, where ideas are more developed and images carefully curated for the page, still hold their value. I'm sure most of us love flicking through a magazine, experiencing the smell, the way it feels, and the way it looks, and all these things. But equally, online has huge advantages over print, audience reach for one, and immediacy, of course. And any photographer who has their own blog or even a Facebook page will know this, or Instagram, Tumblr, etc., knows how quickly work can be shared. But my concern in all of this, and I wonder what you feel about this, is that our hurry to get work out there, we risk not actually taking time to properly think about what we're doing and how we're showing our work. And ultimately, once the work is out there, it's near impossible to control who is distributing it and how. The work is consumed into this free-flowing river of images and text. So in a way, perhaps it's necessary to actually relinquish control and to let the work go off on its own journey, which is not always easy to do. And there's a lot of ethical questions there about copyright and keeping control of your images and how they're being shown. But for me, the ever-changing nature of how we show and experience photography isn't something to be afraid of, overwhelmed by, or to shy away from. It's something to be really embraced. It's about sticking to your path, your own path, as ultimately great images. I think you're going to talk about great images, aren't you, Brian? In a bit. Will rise to the top. And if being aware of the different means of showing photography helps that process, oh no, I've thrown a spanner in the works, then it's no bad thing. For me at least, the constantly changing ways in which we experience photography are precisely what makes it a continually fascinating and invigorating medium to explore, both in terms of fixing photographs in print and sharing them digitally. Just as the analog versus digital debate, which is better, is outmoded, so too is the argument of which is better with regard to online or print, I think, anyway. Both, when properly understood and leveraged, can help a photographer make the next step towards fulfilling his or her potential. Thank you. Hope there's some food for there.
Great, thank you very much. Got a minute to spare as well.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so Paul.
Talk amongst yourselves. Right, well, in case you didn't know, I'm Paul Hill. I'm going to talk showing my own work this afternoon. I want to explore how events and change have affected my practice, impacted on my working methods and aesthetic decisions, and how the internal coalesces with the external. I suppose you could call it transience and transcendence. I've been a photographer for 50 years. I know, I don't look that old. But don't worry, this won't take long. Now, this picture I took when I was a newspaper photojournalist after I'd been a reporter based in the Midlands. I wanted my pictures to tell a story that were frozen moments in time, pictures that grabbed the attention of the reader. My preferred method was, of course, the decisive moment. Now, the decisive moment has been described, I think, by Henri as the simultaneous recognition in a fraction of a second of the significance of any event or an event, as well as the precise organization of forms which give that event its proper expression. But does our brain sort out significant in a fraction of a second, when all those elements come on the same axis from the visual continuum in front of us? Is the decisive moment, is this the decisive moment? Or is this the decisive moment? But I think perhaps one should consider, and certainly I have, and maybe photographers like, Brian might think the same, that the real decisive moment is when you select the image from the contact sheet, the downloaded thumbnails, or when we delete from playback. In other words, the transient moment of exposure is replaced by reflection and analysis. And another more considered set of criteria have to be applied before the experience of making the image, which in my case is usually governed by instinct and speculation, is entirely different to the decision I must now make in order to create permanence, where the selected image transcends the surface reality recorded by the camera. In Sikowski's words, it becomes a mirror rather than a window. But in my press work, the frame was a window. I was the public's witness, so my room for visual maneuver was limited, despite my desire to convey my own feelings. Decision-making and final selection was in the hands of others, so you sought to work for the media outlets that appeal to you creatively as well as politically. Not easy. The wholesale downgrading of journalism by Rupert, the rapacious psycho Murdoch, led me to another major change, from being a reporter to a photographer, and now I was becoming a photography lecturer. And that initiated a window to mirror transformation, a freedom to experiment with the medium, to play with light, frame, vantage point, where the effervescence became as substantial as natural or man-made constructions. The formalistic gestures, creative, emotive, subconscious signifiers that could be metaphoric and symbolic. The collegiate environment gave me the opportunity to push the envelope, take chances, be myself, whatever that self might be. But time, that fourth member of the quartet that included light, frame, vantage point, still fascinated me. I used, as I always have, my immediate surroundings to look at time, but also to subvert the idea that photographs of the landscape, in this case around where I lived, should be made using big tripoded cameras, fine-grained film, and the Ansel Adams manual on the zone system. I wanted to take a different, more gritty route. I used 35mm camera, my God, and a more personal one. My landscapes, as I said, were where I lived. They were me, like all my photographs. My pictures are not illustrations or artworks. My photography is not governed by editors, commissioners, curators, or institutions. It's what I do. It's what I am. All the rest is propaganda. What affects me is reflected in my work. Whether that be an investigation of the process or what is happening to me professionally or domestically, it is personal as well as public. I love that duality. I think with my eyes and foreground my involvement with the world through a camera. After my wife died 8 years ago, my life changed irrevocably. But during that interstasis, I decided to make work just to be positive. And inevitably, it was visceral and reflected the monumental and traumatic time I was going through. This transition created images, and like a Zen archer, I seemed to see beyond the target. The process seemed effortless. These pictures were taken around my house at that time and are in a book called Corridor of Uncertainty. My new life was then melded with my old life. As represented by images made in the 1970s, that's my old life. What had been and what was now, or what may be in the future. Themes were returned to. They're like riffs. I like that idea. The idea of transience, the idea that things come up and flow through our lives and reflect, in my case, what I see, what I feel, what I am, wherever it may be, on the hillside in Dovedale or in a bedroom. Now, Gemma was talking about the new revolution, and that is marvelous, and is wonderful, and here is an iPhone picture that I took. But if you see, there is a theme coming back again here. What I like is that a photograph is permanent, whatever the platform, when everything else is transient. If shadows become immutable via photography, and clothing can resemble a shadow, then truly Henry Fox Talbot was right to call photography natural magic. Like electricity, we know what photography does, but do we know what it is? Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Paul. Lucy.
Okay.
It's all
Excellent. Okay. It's all coming together. I think this is going to follow on well.
You're all just sitting here enjoying it and having a drink. We're bloody working.
Yeah. So thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here. And I thought I would start with this image. It gives me as good a point of entry as any. I'm Lucy Suter, the crooked one, dumped in the puddle of dodgy-looking liquid. Which seems appropriate for today, as I'm going to be speaking as an artist and scholar invested in the crooked rather than the straight trajectory of photography. While I'm interested to some degree in truth, in various iterations of the real, in the documentary and the social, how could I not be? Quite a lot of my scholarship has been spent in exploring and defending another side of photography, the expressive, the fictional, the abstract, parallel worlds and inner worlds, the staged and the manipulated. For today's discussion, we panelists were asked to consider the transient aspects of the world, the changing nature of photography, and the shifting relationships between viewer and photograph. In my 10 minutes, I'd like to respond to this brief by focusing on a particular site of mutability, the time and space of the making rather than the taking of the photograph. Much of the literature of photography centers around the instant of capture, the click of the shutter, sidelining both the preparation that takes place before the click of the shutter and the many possible stages involved in the production of the image's final form. For example, Roland Barthes referred to cameras as clocks for seeing, but was so preoccupied with the photograph's relationship to its real-world referent that he did not have eyes for the kinds of time that went into the preparation and presentation of the images captured by the lens, aspects of the photograph which he argued could not even be perceived without, quote, a secondary act of knowledge or of reflection. And I guess perhaps one of the things that I'm arguing today is that this secondary act of knowledge or reflection is one of the main things that we're engaged in a art photography context. Today, I would like to argue that closer attention to these transitory stages of production illuminates the relationship of photographs to the world, to the viewers who receive them, and to the history in which they are embedded. My 10 minutes won't allow me to do this in any but the most schematic way, but I hope you'll give me a chance. After being a highly unfashionable position for many years, it appears to be coming back into the spotlight, as I will elucidate. I'll look at a small handful of images, both historical and contemporary, including Anna Atkins, Edward Weston, Robert Heineken, and Gregory Crewdson, pointing out aspects of continuity as well as rupture. To back up my statement of the problem at stake, I will note that in the past few years, scholars approaching photography through the lens of philosophy, particularly on this side of the Atlantic, including Diarmaid Costello and Dawn Phillips Wilson, have been interested in refining the ontology of the photograph. In other words, answering the question once and for all, what is it that will rule in all photographs and only photographs? This task seems especially pressing to them at a moment in which the digital appears to change the stakes so much. The definition they've been developing focuses on a photographic event, in layman's terms, the moment of exposure. A photographic event that captures a light image using light sources and objects and results in information that undergoes processes that may or may not result in a visual image. So that's the hottest, latest philosophical definition of photography, in case you were wondering. This definition is all very well and does a good job of separating photographs, both analog and digital, from many other forms of handmade images or from digital images that do not contain an indexical trace of the world. However, it focuses our attention yet again on that instant in which the originary information is seized from the world and pushes all preparation and post-production into the shadows. Consider for a moment this Anna Atkins, and I'm sorry that the rest of the caption has been cut off, but made in the 1830s, a cameraless image made by placing botanical specimens onto a sheet of paper that had previously been sensitized with a solution of ferric cyanide, then pressed into a glass frame, exposed in bright sunlight, probably for about 15 minutes, and then rinsed in water to fix it. Yes, it is the photographic event of exposure that fixed this image, but I have a hard time regarding the fact of capture as any less compelling than the other steps that Atkins performed. The gathering of the sample, the arrangement of the specimen on the page, the gathering of the pages into a typological album, all of these steps contribute to the meaning of this image, right? It may be the trace of actual leaves on paper that makes this definitively a photographic object, but for me, it has other photographic characteristics as well, in its materiality, its appearance, and even its spirit of inquiry, its kind of quest for knowledge that's characterized so much of photography since the very beginning. To push this point further, particularly in relationship to art photography, if we place our emphasis on capture, where does that leave us with images that are highly wrought? So an image like this Edward Weston might be an image of this kind of total transparency between what the photographer saw and the image that he wants to convey. But, I'm sorry, my images are all jumbled up. But images such as these by Gregory Crewdson, Andreas Gursky, or Sharon Core In these images, we could quite rightly argue that the moment of capture is one moment among many in the production of layered images that transcend their original reference in a number of ways. I mean, just in case you don't know anything about Sharon Corr's process, she draws her compositions from historical paintings and then sets about to source all the original plants and fruits and fish, etc., in the world. In many cases, growing the plants from bulb herself. So there were years invested in the making of the images. And we all know that to try and pin an image like this one or this one down to one instant of capture would be preposterous when they're cobbled together from hundreds of images and a pre-production and post-production process that again involves a cast of thousands, a budget of millions, and untold hours of intensive labor, all of which feed into the way we would interpret these images. The moment of the taking of the photograph was certainly the focus of many modernist theories of straight photography. People like Edward Weston, Ansel Adams, and Cartier-Bresson liked to focus on the relationship between the completed image and the originary event. Though it is important to note that others held a different view. Alfred Stieglitz famously argued that every print from a single negative had the potential to be a unique work of art, subtly different and nuanced. How many of you in the room today are photographers yourselves? Yeah, quite a lot, I thought so. And how many of you remember processing black and white film or printing from negatives? Yeah, good, happy to hear it. Okay, my own introduction to photography was through darkroom photography courses at university. First a year of classic black and white 35mm, and then a year of alternative processes, working with enlarged negatives and with processes including cyanotype, Van Dyck, gum prints, and platinum. One of the things that seduced me about photography was the dramatically new relationship to time that it offered me. The 20 minutes that I spent in a dark cubby desperately trying to load my first ever roll of film onto the developing spool was one of the longest of my life. A strange and heightened passage of time laden with promise and risk. And the rhythm and flow of developing negatives and black and white prints drew me into the first all-nighters of my life. Surely one more exposure would do the trick, or a little bit more dodging, or a few seconds extra in the developer. My year of alternative processes deepened this awareness of the way that an image could transform in almost infinite ways, reliant on chemistry, application, exposure, development, etc., transformations of meaning as well as appearance that emerged in the time of making. And I think for anyone with experience working digitally, the variables merely multiply in this regard. I'm not just talking about a fetishization of process here, but about a fundamentally different idea of what a photograph might be and do. As Robert Heineken argued, every photograph has material and expressive as well as representational potential. As he put it, the photograph is not a picture of, but an object about something. Here we go. This image of Susan Sontag, patched together by Heineken from images of Heineken's studio and UCLA, the university where he taught, offers a kind of battle cry against the capture-centric version of photography. Sorry? What?
It's all right for you.
Oh, time check. How much do I? Oh, okay, I'll hurry up. Why be satisfied with the straight image when the manipulated image can offer expression as well as indexical trace and can combine multiple realities and levels of legibility? There's a Heineken retrospective up at the Museum of Modern Art in New York this summer, and it seems an apt moment to reconsider his work. When I was a student at Cal Arts in the mid-1990s, he was reviled as a pervert, a misogynist, and a process junkie. Now he seems much more edgy and prescient. and political in some of the ways that he mashes up and deconstructs the sex and violence of American popular culture through the formal and material properties of photographic processes. Also this year, New York's ICP held a show entitled What is a Photograph?, curated by Carol Squires, which argued that rather than closing down the options for photography, the digital has ushered in an era of permission, possibility, and experimentation. And the artists in the show, including Travis Smalley, Matthew Brandt, Eileen Quinlan, and Mariah Robertson, provide a range of what I'm calling crooked practices. Rather than centering on depicted subject matter, they go out of their way to rupture, hybridize, layer, and contaminate the photographic print. And here's my last paragraph. There are some problems with Robert Heineken's definition of a photograph as an object about something. For one thing, it could apply equally well to a sculpture, a print, a painting, or an installation. As I'm not a philosopher, I'm not troubled by this lack of exclusivity. Rather, I hope to feed into a discussion about the ways that photographic practices develop for makers and audiences in an art context. When I work with photography students today, they do not ask just, what shall I shoot, or even how shall I shoot it? The questions are more likely to be something like, what kind of image is it possible to make that will continue to be relevant and compelling? How do I develop a project that will unfold in complexity and depth so that I have some control over my variables, but I'm not merely carrying out a preconceived series of steps? These are questions that are answered in the making rather than merely the taking of photographs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Okay, so last but not least is Brian Griffin.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I can stand up. I don't mind if I go across my pictures because I'm not going to be reading from anything. It just comes straight from my heart, really. As someone mentioned the heart earlier, straight from my head. So it's just whatever occurs in my head, I'm just going to talk about. Right, I'm Brian Griffin. I'm a photographer, and I've been a photographer for 42 years as a professional. Yeah, I like to be in front of it, though. I'm quite happy now. Can you tap it into slideshow for me? Yeah. I was a photographer. I've been a photographer for 40-odd years, and it's been my life. It's been my love. It's been my, well, one could say in inverted commas, my art form. And I was just thrown into photography, really. I didn't really want to be a photographer, but I just wanted to escape from living amongst a load of factories in the Black Country. So I was absolutely amazed when I saw my first photographs when I was at art college, and the students gathered around my first pictures and they were just amazed at my first picture. The reason I say that, not as a big-headed statement, the fact is that I was amazed as well. I couldn't believe that I could take a photograph. And that is when I applied to the university here a few days ago, is that I'm a firm believer in that the photographer is just a vehicle, he just exists, or she exists, and ideas of what have already been, can we say, come from some force somehow. The photographer just is a vehicle that just captures these ideas and it just creates them, having been almost like a machine, really. Machine in the sense that I feel that there's somebody else controlling me, certainly. So there's nothing transient about me, really, about my life. The decisive moment by Cartier-Bresson, yeah, but it was something that he was a genius. So, and he captured images that were passing through him as a vehicle. So anyway, all my work, what I create is somebody else's, like, I'm just an automaton that just gathers them, really. And I personally feel also, for argument, is that there's such a thing as a masterpiece. And it is not even arguable. You can't even argue about it. It is a masterpiece, and it's not open for argument. It's a total objective statement in photography. That is another thing that we can argue about at the end of my talk, anyway. So anyway, I become a photographer. I found that I possibly can take a photograph, and I search everywhere to get my first job. I'm just saying this to students. I go everywhere to try and get a job, a look-in. I get my first job. And then I start a career. In photography in those days, you got lots of work. So I became equipped as a photographer. I was training myself by being put through the stresses of having to take photographs for publications. And the art side, but I don't know where that was coming from. It was coming from somewhere that I had no control over, and I never have, really. But I'm going to show some photographs now by the fact that I haven't had no control, but I have been affected by one thing. I've been affected by the time I've lived in, the feelings of the people I love, the feelings of, I don't know, where I live, my family, what happens to my life, the pains I go through. Everything keep on sort of coming into me, and they start to sort of govern the way I take the photographs. They're uncontrollably taking me over, these emotions. And however good the photographs are, well, that's due to obviously me doing a lot of photography, being a professional and getting quite good at it, and then somebody else pushing the button for me. The reason I say someone else pushing the button for me, because as I was taking so many photographs as a professional, I realized I was taking photographs I didn't even recognize that I'd taken. Now, I was never a photographer with a camera strapped around my neck, with a camera bringing it up to my eye. I always worked with the lights and a tripod, generally. Certainly over the last 35 years of my career, it's always been set up photography. And then I'd look back at the Polaroid as it was in those days, or the contact sheet, as Lucy was saying earlier about black and white photography. And I tried to figure out, I didn't see those images. I didn't see them. I mean, I constructed something around them. And then something would come out of these pictures. And I started to realize that I had this is obviously, again, me being quite dramatic. I had a subconscious. There was somebody operating me. I was there. I was really, really focused on what I was doing. I was putting maximum effort into it. But I still didn't recognize what I'd taken when I actually pushed the button. I thought it was something slightly different or something quite not like that. It was extremely illuminating to me, and that drove me on as a photographer to keep on being a photographer. That something, I was communicating with elements that I didn't feel existed or people talked about in books or something, or there was something happening out there that was affecting me, and I could not control it. It was partly controlling me and my decision making. But I have chosen today, right back to the beginning. I've chosen today a period, just one period for this transience. It's the 80s. You've got to think about people as old as Paul and I and some of the other people in the audience, what it was like then. And talk about emotion, the emotional feeling about taking your photographs. What do your photographs mean? They mean things to you inside. I did photographs professionally that meant a lot to me. They didn't mean anything to the art directors and magazine people. They didn't even know what they were about. They hated most of them. They didn't really, I mean, I wouldn't answer the phone if they phoned up to see some others. They'd have to use what I'd done, whatever. I just bloody-mindedly got on with my stuff. And I was saying things in my images for these publications, and that was about the time I lived in my life at that time. So in the 80s, we thought we'd just get nuked, didn't we, Paul, really? Just basically nuked. I mean, it's going to go off. I was marching for CND and that, so go back, Paul, sorry. So I'll start at the beginning. So this picture here is actually, it's Sheffield, in fact, to be quite honest. It's all the factories destroyed in Sheffield. But to me, it looked like it had suffered a nuclear attack, or certainly as a war zone. So I designed this sculpture to sit in the center of this bombed-out, derelict, once the big cutlery industry of Britain destroyed industrial area, and took this picture for, I believe it was an advertising campaign or something. They didn't know what I was trying to say, but it's just the death of manufacturing, really. And then, as the 80s went on, and I started to do these corporate things at Broadgate, people died around me. I don't want to go into death or anything. So I just emotionally attacked people that were just basically dead. These are the workmen in Broadgate. This is my depiction of the workmen. It took me about 1.5 hours to do 10 of them. And I was like shouting and screaming at them. I knew what I wanted to do. I was sweating, pouring with sweat. Obviously, I was lighting them, trying to put the little stones around their heads in the same place. These were the workmen that had built the Broadgate in Liverpool Street. And I was like shouting, telling them. I was like filled with like so much. I thought I was like Jackson Pollock almost, you know what I mean? Or abstract expressionists from New York or something in the 50s. I was like filled with this emotion, going at these pictures, and these men, I was going at them like this, literally like this. Sit down there, get there, now, you're going to shoot it. And that's how it was. That's how these were constructed. Then all my photographs I took at that period of time were also about this nuclear attack. And every job I got, this was an album cover for a band called Q-Feel, was part, this is a man being complete, next one, sorry, Paul. He's so good to me, Paul. This is a man being melted, you know, but he's actually a band member at Q-Feel. So everybody was subjected to how I felt about nuclear war at that time. And this next picture of this hand is my own hand. Oh, God almighty. It's my own hand with shaving foam, double exposed, by the way. So then the nuclear attack comes to Broadgate. Here it comes. I lit the whole of Broadgate one night. And this, I suppose, is the fleeting moment, really. Put a laser up there, lit the whole of that side. And then the next one, fired a firework up, which was pathetic. It just burst over the left-hand side there. The man down here firing the fireworks was so nervous because we'd signed off all these windows that if we broke any of these windows with a massive explosion, we'd have to pay for them. So these are the things with professional photography, the stresses you're going through. And he fired it off the side, and then the next shot, which is the picture onto it, he just wouldn't fire the rockets properly. These are 10-inch mortar shells. Like they could hear them all the way in Rotherhithe, 5 miles away. And at this point in time, there were police, a set of police over here on the left-hand side. And the set of police over here telling me to stop. They're going to put me in prison if I don't stop firing these. And at the same time, the Financial Times, this is going to be the centre spread of the Financial Times on Big Bang Day in October '87. So with photography, if you become a professional, if you're really into photography, there's all these masses of stresses coming in and feeding you, and you're like, you're not like, oh, would you stand over there to the left, please? Oh, put your arm up here. No, it's like that, and the police are there, the bombs are going off, the rain's coming down, and it just feeds this like great emotional feeling that you had when you first were a boy, 21-year-old at university, and you saw that first picture, and you went, oh, maybe I can be a photographer, as opposed to a piping engineering estimator. I can be a photographer, and you get like this feeling. And it just enriches you, and it never stops. And it's still going on inside me now. I still feel that way about photography. That's my bit.
Great, thank you very much. Well, I had forgotten to say that you're very welcome to go to the bar and get a drink if you feel like it. Not all at once, but you could kind of drift in and up to the bar and back. We don't have any cocktail waiters, but the job of a chair is to compose some elegant question. Well, you can't say you haven't heard different discourses today, very different, 4 different views. But what was striking was that you all, in quite different ways, talked about control as being central to what you were talking about. And if I can sort of deviate that slightly, into the title on transience because I mentioned this before, but you probably know, some of you, it's the title of an essay by Freud. And it's one of his first attempts to deal with the question of aesthetics, really. And he was walking in the mountains with a poet who saw some beautiful flowers, a bit like that photograph. And the poet was completely melancholic about, look at those beautiful flowers, Freud said. And this guy said, yeah, but they're going to die. And Freud was puzzled that this man, a poet, with some kind of sensibility for the essence of things, felt that it was already dead in a way. And he was perplexed by this thing that, can you not enjoy something in the moment that it is, and accept that it passes? Freud was very interested, of course, to sort of dig deeper as to why this might be something that someone found painful to see something beautiful. And maybe that's sort of important to the question of control in photography, because the moments that you were talking about quite literally in relation to death, but also the time that it takes to get to that image that Brian, you so eloquently and explosively gave us, and Lucy too, and in a very different way in relation to publishing, that control is clearly a central issue for photography. I know, Brian, you said you didn't feel you were in control, but when one looks at your pictures, one senses there is incredible control. So that's a bit of a paradox about control that you all seem to raise.
Yeah, like I said earlier, when I first sort of recognized I had a subconscious in the late 80s after being a photographer for maybe 15 years or something, I really construct an envelope or whatever. I construct a whole situation down to the finest detail if I've got the time, of course, as well as I can. And then I leave that last little window open for the magic to come in. And I don't control that little 1% or 5%, which turns out then to be 100% when people view the picture. Well, almost 100, apart from the lights and everything. I just don't control that last little window. I can't control it, but I'm waiting for it to happen, and I'm controlling the environment to enable it to happen. I'm controlling the environment to enable that little magic from somebody I've never met in my life before to give me. And all I do is just manipulate that person or persons, if it is people, as much as I possibly can by conniving. I was a captain of the grammar school chess team, and I just use every method possible to manipulate my subjects, and then they come with their little bit of magic, that last little teeny little bit which I can comprehend.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, because you've been involved in a way of making pictures that's quite kind of complex. You said you work with lights and cameras, and in a way opposite to Paul, with the guy with the camera around the neck on the street and so forth. And in a way, what's interesting to me in contemporary photography is this shift of the visual values of tableau and the decisive moment that have somehow merged with the sort of mode of making that was usually only restricted to filmmakers or industrial photography, where people had immense resources. And that's very sort of interesting paradox, and it seems to be also opening up a kind of return. I mean, talking about that big show in the States called What is a Photograph, which is kind of like digital pictorialism, where these guys, women and men are spending lots of time reworking images that have been, does that ring a bell?
Yeah, a little bit. Sorry, I've got all kinds of things running through my head. I'm trying to tie them together. Let me think about that for a minute.
Yeah, I think it can be seen as somewhat redundant to actually replicate in great detail a style or a genre that's already been done, on the wing, as it were, in this sort of naturalistic way, a real way, if you want, whatever real is. And so to make, you know, a cast of thousands, as Lucy was saying, to replicate, you know, a particular genre, or it's like, you know, the medium becomes the message in a way. And I think what the sophistication that's happened now in terms of an awareness of different areas of photography is you say, well, what the hell can you do next? You know, I mean, Cartier-Bresson was not a reporter, he was a surrealist. So you've got the reporter, you've got the surrealist, where you know, there's a lot of sophistication. You've got Ansel Adams, you know, and people who are more introspective perhaps than what, in terms of that, the fine print and the landscape, the natural. So you see, this is all, you know, you always get the feeling it's being done. Somehow there's something that triggers in the back of your mind, or your visual mind, as it were, as I say, I think with my eyes, that makes me want to take a picture. And it's like Brian, in a very controlled situation, but he has a vision, but things happen that he didn't expect when he gets there, even with all the lights and so on and so forth. And that's what it is. Round the next corner is a wonderful moment that maybe you've never seen before. And it's what I've never seen before that interests me. It's what Alexei Bradovich sort of said, you know, taught people like Penn and Tony Ray Jones and so forth, went to his classes and said, well, if you look through the viewfinder and you've seen that picture before, don't press the shutter. But it comes extremely difficult to do that. And I'm only interested really in photography, well, not only interested in photography. For myself, I find it much easier to foreground my involvement with the world with a camera. You mean, the world is what, you know, what I am moved by for my photographic work.
And I think, I mean, I remember being struck as a photography student by the sort of bizarre naivete of aspects of camera lucida, where it seemed like Bart had like never taken a picture, like he just didn't, like the transformations that the camera performs on reality, he just did not, that whole, all the levels, when he was so acutely sensitive to layers of meaning and codes everywhere all the time. And I think part of what's happening now is that audiences are so much more sensitized to the constructedness of imagery that it's sort of freed up photographers to no longer be the you know, the handmaidens of reality, and to allow for some of the process to be foregrounded and be part of the picture. I mean, in the same way that people are now much more willing to accept that a fiction might be able to tell them something about reality.
I'm just talking about Bart. I think what I find with photographic students, to a certain extent, because you know, camera lucida is on the reading lists of all courses, it seems to be, is they're more familiar with Bart's grandmother than their own. And that's what I think I would like them to be, more interested in their own situation, their own existence, rather than to, you know, try and learn from Bart, learn from other, many more sources. But it's become such a, you know, intellectual cliche. And people like Sikowski, you know, are largely, you know, forgotten as thinkers. And he was a photographer, which, from what you tell me, Bart certainly wasn't.
It was his mother, actually, but yeah, point taken. It was his mother, actually, but point taken, but his grandmother.
Oh, yeah.
A boy should know his mother. It was
But I think that's a really good point. You can only really make the pictures that you can make, and you're seeing the world through, you know, it's your mediation of reality and your interpretation of that. And that's why it kind of almost doesn't matter that people have taken pictures before, because it's always going to be your interpretation. And I think you both, Brian and Paul, really mentioned about, you know, it's what I do, it's what I am, and I love that. You know, it's sort of such a part of you that actually you can't do anything but take the pictures that are true to you, and that's what will give the photographs the integrity ultimately, I think.
So can losing control be a good thing?
I think you should.
It's a dangerous question, I know. But
I thought you were going to take off.
No, I thought of something really good and I've forgotten it.
I hate when
I've got a one-liner while you're
Yeah, think about it.
Once I was talking to Olivier Richon about the predominance of the word critical in photography today, sort of critical thinking, critical theory, critical photography, and he said, I really like that word, but more in the sense of the situation is getting critical. You know, this idea that a certain kind of analysis and control is always going to be tipping over into the hysterical and the desperate and the unknown. But that you know, it's good to keep in touch with that.
Yeah.
Any thought, Brian?
I don't know, really. I'm just trying to think. I mean, I feel like I'm totally in control, really, but the elements that are not in my control are within my controlled situation that I've created. So therefore, you're saying, David, a second type of control, aren't you? In a way, like you form a framework of control, and then within that control, an element that you don't control happens. So there's two layers of control. Are you thinking in those terms as well, rather than a control situation with just a little gap open at the top? I'm thinking of a control situation with something out of your control inside it, you know, as opposed to
which
outside.
for me came from surrealism, you know, where they would set up situations, games or whatever, in which people would just go mental in a way.
Using juxtaposition of elements and all sorts of things. You had to create excitement.
Okay, let's open it up. I'm sure you have questions and comments you'd like to, if people who are in the show would like to say something, or anyone else would. No, it takes a minute or two to think. Yes, Frank. Oh, you need a mic. Have we got a mic person?
I was taken perhaps by the idea of, because I know both Brian and Paul's work, that they represent two opposites. One loosely maybe conceived as the idea of the taker, and one as the maker. And in a way, perhaps this is leading on from David's question, where in a way what this idea of sort of taking and making comes out of a desire within, or the desire about photography, and what originates in your idea of making a photograph in terms of the unconscious. You know, this idea that within the unconscious is desire. Within desire are ideas that we can never really sort of control. And in a way, photographs are about a dissatisfaction with the world, that perhaps we can make the world better, or make the world in the way we want to make it. So it made me think that perhaps Paul and Brian aren't really opposite ends of the spectrum, if you like. It's the idea that perhaps both are interested in reconstructing the world and ordering it, going back to what we were saying, controlling it. And this idea that, you know, often you put this sort of Cartier-Bresson left-hand corner, Ansel Adams in the right-hand corner. But as soon as you start thinking of the idea of construction and reordering the world, then it seems that the two polarities that perhaps you might represent become quite close. And having constructed the world as you want to make it, is this idea of what do those worlds represent? And that's where perhaps an audience comes in and starts to look at those images and, to use the sort of term, deconstruct them. But I wondered if you had any thoughts about how the two of you sort of represent those two polarities between taking and making.
Well, I'm holding the mic, so I'll speak first. For me, really, it's extremely difficult to describe why, you know, you make a picture, but it is definitely who I am, in the sense that I use this form of expression to put order, to reflect, to show my anger, to show my sadness, whatever it may be, but I don't deliberately set out, with those intentions. They find me, and that's the wonderful thing. Photographs find you. You take a lot of baggage with you, and there is that moment of recognition where all, things happen that, maybe like the man in the snow picture is like a Sandeman Port advertisement. Maybe that did influence me in terms of why I recognized what that could be. It could be something else. But I think it's so important really to, there is a difference, there is right. Artists, I think, are like bricklayers, or maybe like architects, I don't know. But whatever it is, they construct things in a way a painter might construct things. And a photographer coming from a different tradition actually responds. And I'm a responder, not a constructor. I do use constructions in the sense of putting pictures on pictures and doing a little bit of montage, but it's very, very DIY. And, I do that because in the case of using Polaroids on old photographs of the 70s, it's because I just wanted to see what it looked like. And, and a camera, and the developments of camera technology and processes have affected the aesthetic tremendously. I've just been involved with a book called The History of Photography in 50 Cameras, and someone's run the narrative of how certain cameras have affected, practice, and it's been fascinating, and I've been really enjoyed being involved in that project because it is so immense, so immensely important. So I just play with the camera, play with the process. I'm interested in, elements that are purely photographic, because that is my interest and no more. I don't consider it, what's the market out there for what I do. Since I was a photojournalist where there was a market and they had a certain prescribed sort of photograph for that market, I've just gone my own way, which is very, very frustrating at times, and because you don't always have those moments. And I have never, ever been commissioned to take photographs since about 1972. So that freedom and that discipline and that focus is very hard to maintain.
I think both Paul and the speaker say things so eloquently and so well. The way because I was a basic boy really, and I sort of constructed my photographic career on the basis of obvious thought patterns, I think. When I first went to college, I was interested in Winogrand, Friedlander, obviously Tony Ray Jones and Bresson and all those people. And I was very fortunate at college that there were some very, very talented students. It was just a miracle. I say college because I didn't go to a university. Were extremely talented photographers, and we would go out to photograph the same things. And I would come back with my depiction of the same things we were all photographing. And the really talented photographers really shook me, actually. How brilliant, how they could perceive incredible situations that I couldn't see at that tender young age, really. And it was a real big shock initially, that was the first shock. And the second thing, therefore, I started to sort of, as I said earlier, I started to sort of educate myself photographically, and I realized that in order to get a good picture as a taker, as rather than a maker, was in the sense that I have to find an environment. This is like the decisive, the non-decisive moment, or David probably knows better, that Winogrand invented, wasn't it? Where, obviously a decisive moment is a decisive action or decisive occasion, and a undecisive moment or non-decisive moment is just prior or just after the action. And we were really getting into that in the late 60s, early 70s as students, and I would learn that I should position myself out on the streets or wherever we were out in the real world and sort out my environment, my two pillars, my back wall, I don't know, my street, whatever, the aesthetic that I really liked, and just stake my claim there and just stay all day watching for occasions to happen and choose my moments with that as my backdrop. And I just forgot what I was going to say. And then I realized and noticed about myself that I like sort of bringing things into order, because like I was choosing my aesthetics, and And I notice now, you know, I like to 2 cups there, 1 cup over here. You know what I mean? And I think David Beckham suffered from it or something, didn't he? And I put the phone there, and that's at home in the corner, you know. Then over here, I put the water bottle right on the edge of that computer there. And I think a lot of my photography is about tidying up the world, actually. I think I just like try to bring a bit of tidiness into it. And yeah, I mean, what else did you say, Paul? I can't remember.
You've talked too much. Lucy.
What question was it for me?
Anybody else want to? No?
I mean, actually, in relation to what Paul was saying about the different cameras and stuff, I mean, it is, now there is a ubiquity of iPhones or whatever. It is amazing to see what, you know, even though there's millions of them, it's amazing to see what people do with them. It is strikingly so different, despite the homogeneity of the technology. I mean, you must come across this in your, or don't you come across this?
You mean everything looking the same?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you only have to look at all the Instagram feeds and things, and there are certain trends and tropes, but I guess there's more need, what I would say in response to that, there's more need than ever for people with educated eyes, I suppose, or people that, you know, good editors, and I'm not talking about myself necessarily, but like, you know, perhaps a magazine like BJP does have, I posed the question of like, what's the role of a print magazine, and I think it, you know, it still has that value really, and more than ever, and we need really good authorities who actually can kind of act as filter mechanisms, whether that's within kind of you know, a museum environment, putting on great shows, because, you know, I think photography is something that you experience by seeing, and you know, you get a very different sort of, you know, experience looking at it in a kind of gallery or on the street, if it's an outdoor exhibition at a festival, or you know, looking through a magazine or online. You know, when you self-curate, and you know, with this thing called Pinterest, and you're sort of picking out things, and you're a bit like a magpie and things, but yeah, you can kind of, the excitement is for me like creating that kind of sort of own sort of how to put it, sort of paper trail of things, and sort of a scrapbook really. Everyone, you know, and I mean there are ethical questions that we don't have to go into now about taking people's images, but for, you know, sharing them for personal use, I think is really exciting, just to kind of, you know, combining how images go together really.
Any questions? Just raise your hand and I'll pass the mic.
On the back, young Steve.
Cheers. Hi there. Oh, wow. I missed the start, so apologies if this has already come up, but I wondered if the members of the panel, I know this may not be an either-or question, but whether you would see the photograph as a way of, as a reminder of the passing of time, or as a way of freezing time.
Thank God you asked that question, Steve, because I just remember what I was going to say when I was talking last by you asking that question now. I once had an exhibition where it showed all my first 30 years of my career, all my portraits at Derby Museum in 1990 or something, 3 or something, and I could see all my life in front of me. So every single image constructed a memory. Not of taking the photograph, but a memory of a period of time in my life, a small segment in my life. So the moment of the image was irrelevant, or what the image contained, it was just a memory. And I just looked at the whole of my life, just laid out around me, and just sat there looking at it. And I could see the whole picture of my life, Stephen. So does that answer part of your question? Or
yeah,
not really?
Fantastic. No, that's great. Thank you.
I mean, were you there when I talked about the decisive moment, Steve, in my presentation?
Apologies, Paul. I wasn't.
No. Oh, well, I won't. It's just that I mentioned that maybe the decisive moment was actually the moment when you choose the image from your contact sheet. Right. And, you know, I show 2 pictures. Is this a decisive moment, or is that a decisive moment? So, you know, anyway, you missed it. It's not good enough, Steve.
I missed the decisive moment.
Yes.
That just picks up on the point of the role of editing, really, and quite often, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn here, but people have said, that photographers aren't always their best editors, and actually the photographers I've interviewed over the last sort of 7-8 years in my career as a journalist, quite a few people have said they need to spend that time away from their work. That might be weeks, or when we're talking about personal work here, not necessarily commission work, which is a whole different sort of ballgame, really. But actually allowing yourself that, I think you talked about this, Paul, as well, is kind of reflecting on your images and actually sort of looking at how they relate to one another. And I think that's where the kind of constant excitement comes from, because photography is really exciting, and I don't buy into this whole being jaded by it. Is photography over? I think it's very much alive. It's always been changing, and it will continue to change, and that's what keeps it really exciting for me anyway. Yeah, I'm sure I had another thought, but I think it's gone out of my head. But yeah.
It's so good to hear Gemma's enthusiasm and passion, from a different generation. Obviously, you heard Brian's explosive presentation, and then that's what it is. The passion is what counts. We're doing a symposium at London Met in October. David's involved as well on passion in photography, the instinct and the idea. So I think is a time to actually. I said at the end, we know what electricity does, but what is photography? What is a photography? And I think that's important. And I think, in the sense, it's a vehicle for our feelings and our passions and so forth, but also the multiplicity of things that are happening around. That in terms of new technology and is so exciting. But is there something at the core? Has it become too academized? Is there too much theory? And this is no criticism necessarily of theory. It's just its theory should be in service of the images, and a lot of students are confused now about maybe it's the other way around. And although that argument's always been there. But I think the passion, and so good to hear that passion coming from what you were the way you were talking, Gemma.
But you've been very eloquently theorising all afternoon. I'm not sure what this theory you're talking about that's the enemy of what you're doing, because you're doing it yourself, it seems to me. And all of those great photographers who theorised it are part of that debate, it seems to me. But I guess the answer, it depends on what you mean by photography, doesn't it? Because if you're asking whether it's something to hold time or destroy it, it's very different if you're thinking about fashion photography, where transience is absolutely crucial, because fashion defines itself by what is not fashion. So that boundary of what is now and what is not now is always in movement constantly, and that's its very existence. Whereas family photographs have a very different role, or personal photographs as they're called now. And I guess art is a kind of, Brian, you raised it, the idea that a masterpiece is a masterpiece and it's unchallengeable. Seems a very Kantian view. I don't know if you've read Kant, but it's a very Kantian view of art, that it's very definite what it is. That issue of what is valuable or what the role of the photograph is in art seemed to me have become much more complicated in the last few decades, precisely because its role in the other spheres has become less complicated and more confused in the way that you're talking, Paul. And I'm not sure that you can blame theory for the confusion about photography, actually. I think you can blame it on photography, because it's a very confusing time. You can look at every single discipline that tries to study the time we live in, and they'll call it liquid modernity or transient modernity, or everybody has the sense that we're in a moment of kind of transition that has the echoes of the 1930s, with the technology was suddenly rapidly changing, but it's obviously very different at the same time. So we have that. I don't know if you want to add to it. You are nodding enthusiastically.
I was just thinking about the selfie stick that's just recently been drawn to my attention, this new invention. And I was talking to someone recently who was saying, what are these things, these kind of selfie stick things I've seen people using so that they can get the whole, Louvre in behind them, And so, of course, we Googled selfie stick, and they pop up on Amazon, 11 different kinds and at different price points. And, because the technology, what people want from photography, what they need from photography, and what photography has to offer them are constantly mutating and changing, and they're gonna keep doing that. So that's why I was nodding. But I think it's not either or. That's my answer, Stephen, that it's both. And I know the philosophical types who want to get really specific with the ontology are going to be disappointed, but photography does lots of things, and it definitely does both.
Thanks a lot.
Great, thank you, Steve. Any more?
Thanks. Quite a few of you spoke about the moment of capture, the take versus make. And I just wonder whether it's the role of the photographer that's now going to be transient, as we're on the cusp of some very major leaps forward in technology and data storage. The things like the Litro field camera or the red camera that can just capture a constant stream of images, and the technician can walk down the street and get them. And it's going to be the curator, the editor afterwards. Is the role of the photographer as the taker transient?
Yeah, good question.
I think this is absolutely. One learns from the images that you've made. The accidents, you learn more from the accidents than the successes to a certain extent. And your contact sheet, and Brian mentioned this. I didn't know I took that. That was, how did that? And I think you learned. So in a sense, yes, the curator is always going to be there, and you as a photographer, are that curator at that time, that moment, that selection. And Gemma was saying, well, maybe photographers who do personal work aren't always their best editors, because that may or not be true enough. So yeah, and I think what really I think separates that whatever you do, whatever photography is about, it's actually about the person who is making the pictures and the passion they have for wanting to do it. I mean, it's who I am. I can't think of doing anything else. I mean, I can do other things, I hasten to add, washing up, obviously, and stuff. But it's actually me. It gives me identity, and I don't have to think about it. It's such a natural case. Of course, I was.
Their role going to be much more important in shaping your photograph. If you've captured something with a field camera and someone decides they don't like that out of focus, they want it in focus, or they've shot it on red and they've shot 50 frames a second for 3 minutes, and they can choose another frame that you didn't choose. Who's the more important in that relationship? Is your role, our role as photographers, transient, and the gatekeeper's role, the curator, the publisher, the editor?
Well, to a certain extent, to add to that, I mean, Facebook is now my publisher. I make pictures and put them on Facebook. That could be a gatekeeper, but where else? In a sense, that's not only what I do, because I can make them on an iPhone with a Blurbab app into a book if I wanted to. So I have something solid out of it. So these things really interest me. Those platforms, the changing platforms, because we're never going to go back. But having said that, in a nostalgic sense, people like to buy the hard copy of BJ. I mean, it's just one of those things that that will always be there. But the choice, obviously, to a certain extent, is the photographer. Its platforms is theirs. And I find something like Facebook very attractive, despite all its critics.
And authorship has always been more permeable than people wanted to admit. So we can think about named photographers who were actually couples or collectives. You could think about someone like John Hartfield or Hannah Hoch. Do we think of them as photographers, or is it just that they used bits of photography? Do we care who made the original bits? So like the Robert Heineken that I showed, all the little fragments that went into the Susan Sontag were actually taken by his assistant. Do we care? So It partly depends whether we care about holding on to authorship, because they're obviously going to be guiding consciences who shape projects and put their stamp of their vision or their concept onto single images or groups of images, and that's not going to change. But in a lot of environments, it may be perfectly possible for images to be powerful and meaningful to us without them necessarily having authorship, and for them to be brought together under the auspices of curators or editors rather than photographers, and that may be okay too. I mean, it's partly a question of who makes a living and how they make a living, and we have to care about those things because we need to feed ourselves. But I think some of the anxiety over those things is misplaced because they've never been as comfortable as one image, one author in the past anyway.
I think it comes back down to what we were talking about, this idea of control, and also I would add choice as well. And I think you do have a choice, and I think it's up to the individual to educate themselves as to what the options are and to understand the landscape and the environment that you're working in and all the different landscapes environments, because we've discussed there is no one set identity for photography or way of experiencing or using photography. And actually, you know, having a long, hard think about what it is that you want to do, and it comes back down to the individual. And I think, you know, if you're working in a commercial way, then yes, there are going to be certain kind of hoops you have to jump through. That's just the nature of the beast, really. But you can work as Paul has and just concentrate on your own work and be true to that, and kind of sack everything else off, really. So it depends what kind of photography you want to be, really. And there's so many options out there, and there is no one but yourself just telling you what to do, really.
Okay, does that answer your... Do you want to come back on that? No. Okay. Any other comments, questions? Well, we have a beer. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you can go and have a beer. Yeah. Should we take a break there, because we've got this auction at 5 o'clock? Is that right? Where's my chief organizer? Gone to the bar.
About 5 o'clock, yeah.
Yeah, so should we take a break now, and then we can have go for drinks, and those who'd like to stay for the bar. So I think we should thank all of our contributors and yourselves Saturday afternoon. And feel free to come and talk to us or them. No others here. We're all equal, and we will all be equal at the bar. So help yourselves, and we'll start the auction at 5 o'clock. So thanks very much.